This is Pastor Steve Talmage from Love of Christ Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. I'd like to provide a brief introduction to our gospel reading for this coming Sunday, April 26, 2020, which is Luke 24, verses 13 to 25, the story of the walk to Emmaus. I want to give credit to Dr. Eric Barreto for his insights on some of this background material to Luke 24. In the Gospel of Luke, there are many stories or accounts of roads or paths being a part of the story of Jesus' mission and ministry. The most obvious is Mary and Joseph taking that road trip from Nazareth to Bethlehem for the birth of Christ. Two of Luke's most famous and familiar parables, the parable of the Good Samaritan and the parable of the prodigal son, include road trips. The Good Samaritan tells the path from Jerusalem to Jericho, and the parable of the prodigal son is the story of a road from a distant country back to home. And then from Luke 9:51 to 19:28, we get Luke's version of Jesus' travel narrative of getting him finally into Jerusalem for the last week of his life. If we move to the book of Acts, also written by Luke, we see at the front end of the book of Acts key road stories. We have the road story of Jerusalem to Samaria, as Jesus promised his disciples in Acts 1:8 that they'll receive power and become his witnesses to Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. The first convert is outside of Jerusalem, and it is a Samaritan. The second, shortly after the Samaritan's conversion, is on the road from Samaria to Gaza, where Philip engages the Ethiopian eunuch, the treasurer of the queen, who's a sexual minority, an outsider, a non-Jew. And then the most famous road story in Acts is that from Jerusalem to Damascus, where the zealous Saul is converted to become the Apostle Paul. Roads matter. Think of your own life. Think of the places that you have traveled and gone, the experiences you've had, the people you have met, and how God, the Lord, may have been present. Roads bring us together. They pose a danger to us all by allowing access to friend and enemy alike. And in Luke's gospel, they're often a symbol to describe a faith that is on the move. So if you read after the Gospel of Luke and go into the second book, Acts, that he wrote, the majority of that book of Acts are the travels of Paul, the missionary adventures and journeys of Paul, a faith that's on the move. The walk to Emmaus. It's a 7-mile road trip, hike, journey from Jerusalem to Emmaus. Let's listen to the story. Now, on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, the things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning. And when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they did not see him. Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory? Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted them the things about himself and all the scriptures." As they came near to the village which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were open, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour, they got up and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Key themes in this story of the walk to Emmaus. Key themes that are important in the scriptures, important to Luke. First, we have this story included, and it has table fellowship. The key event happens both on a road and then around a table. Cleopas and the other disciple extend hospitality, which is a central cultural value and a religious obligation to many in the Middle East. Then we see faithfulness, because these were disciples of Jesus and they were wanting to understand. They're eager and curious to figure out what had happened and how could they make sense out of this. And then fourth, we see discipleship, because they take what they have experienced and they go back to the other disciples to share and be a witness of what had just happened to them on their way to Emmaus. Questions are raised whenever you look at scripture, and some of the questions you might have is, who is Cleopas and the other disciple? Bible scholars don't know. You can Wikipedia, you can go to a Bible dictionary. This is the only reference of Cleopas in the Bible. And the other disciple is anonymous, so we just don't know. We also know in that upper room, both at Pentecost and maybe even that Passover in which Jesus shared his last meal, there were more than just the 12 disciples. Second question is, what prevented them, like Mary Magdalene at the tomb on Easter morning, from recognizing Jesus? Now, the scripture says that they were prevented from seeing him. Why? Maybe it was their own grief, their own hopes being distorted or dashed. Who knows? But what we do know is that Jesus was standing with them and they did not know who he was. What might have been their emotional state in light that it was the third day, it was Easter morning, and they had heard the story of the women, and they had heard the witness of some of the disciples running to the tomb and seeing for themselves that his body was gone. What about the political and religious climate happening right then? Crucifixion of Jesus, the city full of pilgrims, the religious leaders wanting to maintain peace at all costs in cooperation with their Roman occupied leaders. What may have been their motivation to extend the invitation to hospitality? Was it religious obligation? Was it cultural practice? Or were they just curious, given what he had already told them on the road and seeing that he was going to walk ahead? Maybe they wanted to learn more. Maybe they were concerned for his safety. We just don't know. But what we do know is they extended an invitation and Jesus accepted, and their life was never the same. Other questions that come up and apply to us. When is Jesus most Jesus to you? When in your life have you experienced Jesus right in your midst, here in plain view? Why is fellowship around a table with strangers so often recorded in the scriptures as that place where God takes on flesh and dwells among us? Final thought. Dr. Eric Barreto writes, the scene on this road augurs the future of Christ's church. This will be a church on the move, sent out by a Jesus who walks alongside us, even when we don't recognize him. Thank you for being a part of being a church on the move. A church on the move during this time of pandemic. A church being a community of Christ followers who may be struggling to see Jesus in our midst as we find ourselves staying at home, cut off from the relationships and community that have meant so much to us. I pray that these little introductions into our lessons can help continue the practice of Bible reading and study, even though we are apart, and until we can do it again, together with each other. God bless you.